Hi, and welcome back to Leanne's Story Corner. So this is story number 7, and this is part 3. If you have not watched 1 and 2, please go back and watch those. It lays everything out. We are talking about the case of the Warnocks. So we just finished the case in Des Moines, and then basically getting a slap on the wrist. Just a reminder, the content of this video may not be appropriate for some due to the graphic details. Viewer discretion advised. Okay, so we're going to fast forward a little bit. George Warnock actually did pass away sometime between 1985 and 1990. I could not find an obituary or death notice or anything on him. It just happened. One article said he had died from a chronic lung disease. So I'm not sure why there's no information of his death. So let's go back to George and Betty Warnock had their house actually seized by the IRS and was sold at auction. So when they moved out of Dogpatch, they moved to the Lake of Ozarks in Missouri. In 1985, George and Betty also were ordained as ministers to perform many marriages. So they were ordained online. Basically, if you had a name and an address, you were ordained. Roughly between 1984 and 1985, George and Betty met this man by the name of James Gregory. If you remember right, back in part 1, they have an adopted daughter with the last name Gregory. I couldn't put the two together, so I don't know what went on there. But in 1987, just a little side note, Bob Warnock was actually the adopted son of George and Betty, was convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage girl. He got a suspended sentence. Huh? In January 2nd of 1989, a young girl by the name of Annie went to the home of George and Betty Warnock to help clean up, which had been damaged by a fire. Now, this is the one in Missouri, not here. Annie was a friend of Betty's daughter, Dana, age 14, and Donna, age 15. Again, all of this is public knowledge. This was a case docket that I found. After Annie arrived at the home and at a time when Donna and her boyfriend Terry went upstairs, James approached her. He first asked her about her family and then invited her to sit down on the love seat with him, located next to the stairs where Donna and Terry Weaver, which was Donna's boyfriend, went upstairs. She sat down beside James. He began to rub her breast. He kissed and hugged her, and he let her feel his strength from the amount of power he put into his hug. James told Annie not to make him hurt her. She testified that she was pretty quiet after that. Again, this is from a court document. This is all her testifying against this guy. So it goes on to say, while James and Annie were seated on the love seat, Donna and Terry came downstairs, got some tea, and went back upstairs. After going back upstairs, Donna, in an angry tone, told Annie to get upstairs. At that point, James would not let Annie move from where she was seated. He then undid her blue jeans, placed his hand on her for a couple of minutes, and told her he wanted. Annie testified she was scared. Donna called down for her again, and Annie, without further restraint from James, went upstairs. Later that evening, Annie had told Terry about the incident. The following day, she separately informed Donna and Betty. Annie described Betty's reaction as one of anger, and she said Betty repeatedly apologized about the incident. Shortly after hearing of the incident, Betty confronted James in his room. So supposedly James was staying in a room, he would just come and go. I still can't figure out how they got in with this guy. But so Betty confronted James in his room. Also present at this confrontation was Annie and Terry. When confronted, James was packing to leave the Warnock home. Neither the state nor James' counsel asked Annie about James' response, if any, when he was confronted about the accusations. Sorry. Annie did not immediately report the incident to law enforcement officials because she did just wanted to forget about it. Which, do you blame her? But after Hickory County officials learned about the incident from another source, they contacted Annie, who then told them exactly what happened. Then James was charged on May 17th, 1990. So there was also, Annie also testified in regards to Betty and James' relationship. Annie testified without objection that they were together. They kind of liked a flea market. They were lovers. And he lived in the Warnock house at that time. So if you remember back when they got divorced 10 years after they were married, they had a third person by the name of Oscar living with them. So now they got this guy, James, living with them. So the deputy, Ronald Kennedy, testified he was present when James was arraigned. In the complaint, the victim was named as Jane Doe. And Kennedy testified that James asked at the arraignment, "Who's Jane Doe?" Kennedy also testified that after a judge explained that it was just a name to fill the charge, James asked which one complained. No! There's more than one. At the trial, James testified that he had never before been charged with a crime and had no convictions. He acknowledged sitting with Annie on the love seat and that he had his arm around her. He denied holding her against her will, threatening her, or touching her in any manner other than putting his arm around her. James admitted that Annie, Betty, and Terry had met with him in his room at the Warnock home concerning Annie's accusations. So James testified about his relationship with Betty Warnock contradicted Annie's. He testified that he and the Warnocks were just friends. He said he had a bedroom in the Warnocks' home but lived there only part-time, and he came and went when he pleased every 2 or 3 days. So where was he going? Anyways, so it says James called 3 witnesses. To me, that sounds like he was his own lawyer, which is odd. Why would you be your own lawyer? He called 3 witnesses who testified without objection about James' reputation for truthfulness and honesty. Donnie Platter testified that all she had ever heard is good. Nina Whalen testified, everybody I've talked to says he's honest and well liked. Finally, Matt Collin testified that James' reputation is the best there is around Camden, because they actually moved to Camden when all this took place. Yeah, there's nothing against the man nowhere in the world. Collin added he had never heard James use a foul language. After the 2 defense rested, the state called Betty Warnock as a rebuttal witness. She testified that James stayed at her residence whenever he wanted, but denied having any romantic relationship with him. She did not remember the meeting in James' room in regards to Annie's accusations. Over James' objection, the state brought forth her criminal record, including 6 counts of felony neglect of a minor, December of 1982, in Polk County. Abandonment of a dependent person, a felony, also December of 1982. Solicitation of prostitution when she was a young girl. Solicitation of prostitution in 73, and a violation of federal income tax law, a felony in 1976. Now, let's go back here. The 6 counts of neglect of a minor, that's not how they put it before. Or the abandonment of a dependent person as a felony. The docket said in Iowa that it was actually just 12 counts of child abuse and abandonment. So records are so messed up at this time. Anyways, reference to Betty's convictions and closing argument as part of the effort to discredit James' testimony reinforces our beliefs that the jury did not disregard the improper evidence and was influenced by it. The prosecutor in the closing argument specifically linked Betty Warnock's credibility that of James when he stated. So then he says in his closing arguments, well, I don't need to go through all the convictions again, what her, meaning Betty's, word is worth. It's not worth anything, and neither is a 68-year-old man's who put his hand down a 16-year-old girl's pants. It's not worth anything. So, Mr. James Barry Gregory was found guilty by a jury of sodomy and sentenced to accordance with the jury's recommendation for 7 years of imprisonment. So, you say, is this nightmare over, Leon? I still have one more part to read. Sadly, it gets worse. And unfortunately, I think if Iowa would have locked her and George up, a lot of this would have never happened. So, I want to thank you for listening, and be good and have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon.